This is episode 16 of the History of Podcast. I'm Robert. Emma's not here today. Well, she's technically here, but she will be conducting the interview. I'm just doing the beginning and ending. But today we are doing an interview with Mr. Veronne Carter. It is a first-hand account. He was living in New York at the time of the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001, and I will get to that in a moment. But a few things I would like to get out of the way are our YouTube channel. It's called The History Of. It's the same name as our podcast. For those of you who get your podcast on YouTube, please check that out. Also, the History of Podcast Instagram. It's just called The History of Podcast, one word. And so our guest today, Mr. Veronne Carter, he is a kind and witty man who never fails to put a smile on your face. He holds a degree in communications from Nyack College and other higher degrees and certification. Mr. Carter served as a pastor and elder at churches in Southeast Pennsylvania and Nashville. And he is currently a high school English and drama teacher in Knoxville, Tennessee. And in 2001, he worked at a Christian bookstore in Midtown Manhattan, New York, and was in that store when 9/11 occurred. And this interview is much longer than our typical episodes, so without further ado, I will get right into it.
Hello?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, cool. All right, so you ready to get right into it? So we're going to add an intro and conclusion after we record this, and we're just going to put this in the center.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well.
So Robert is here. He is being the sound guy today. So I don't know, like there's a mirror back here, so you might see him in the reflection or over here. Why don't you wave and say hi, bud?
Yeah, you gotta wait. I see him. I just saw him. Hey, buddy.
Just, I guess, diving right in. What was 9/11 like for you?
What, you're not gonna even do the egg count yet?
No,
We'll do that in the intro.
we're gonna do it in the intro. I mean, unless you want us to do it with you, that could be fun.
I want to know how many egg cartons you have.
Okay.
I mean, come on. I don't get that much.
Is it 22?
Let's see.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 22. It's 22.
Today's egg carton
Okay.
count is 22. So actually,
That's
if
good.
you want to see our egg carton wall, that's the beast right there. It's a whole bunch of egg cartons.
Ooh, and
Yeah.
they're colorful. Look at that. I like
Yeah.
that.
So I'm maybe we'll like color coordinate them sometime, or nah, maybe not, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that'll look weird.
Now-
You should just do it random. It's just gotta
Okay.
be random.
All right. So
It's 22.
today's egg carton
Okay.
count is 22. So actually,
That's
if
good.
you want to see our egg carton wall, that's the beast right there. It's a whole bunch of egg cartons.
Ooh, and
Yeah.
they're colorful. Look at that. I like
Yeah.
that.
So maybe we'll like color coordinate them sometime, or nah, maybe not, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that'll look weird.
Now-
You should just do it random. It's just gotta
Okay.
be random.
All right. So you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So how long have you lived in New York? Did you just move to New York when this event happened? Or have you lived there for a while?
When September 11th, I was born in New York. So I lived in New York for 20 or some years. Then I left, went to Nashville doing music, and then came back to New York. So I think I moved back to New York in 2000.
Okay. All right. So you've been there for a while, so you're familiar with it, but you just moved back. Been there for like a
Yeah.
year. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
when did you realize that 9/11 was going on?
The moment I woke up that morning,
Really?
just because it was 9/11. No, I'm kidding. I mean, not the event, but like the day.
Yeah.
And the store opened at 9:30. So I get there. I was one of the managers. So I got there around 8:30, and you're just in the store, just getting things set up. So I worked in the music department, and we're putting up new releases on the wall. So it was Michael W. Smith, his very first worship album
Oh.
came out that day. Yep. There was POD. I don't know if you even remember them, but kind of an indie rock band that got really big. So they put out, I think it was the Satellite album that went out that day. There was a Out of Eden, which was like a Christian pop record, and their album This Is Your Life, I think was the album that went out that day. And there was a bunch of little ones. So I mean, all morning long we're just getting the stores set up. The World Trade Center just got hit, and we're like, well, we don't believe that. That's ridiculous. Nothing's going to hit the World Trade Center. It said a plane flew into the World Trade Center. So it took us a while to even believe it. And then we found some little TV. We plugged it in and messed with the antenna ears to see it. And that's when we found out, oh, wow, a plane just hit the, one of the World Trade Centers. So it was shortly after that we actually saw the second one hit. So that was when it became really real.
Oh my goodness. How close or how far away was your store from the Twin Towers?
Yeah, so we're, Manhattan, I worked in Manhattan, and of course that's where it is. When you think New York City, New York City is an island surrounded by islands. So Manhattan is this long strip, and it's something like 70 blocks north to south, and then you've got the east to west. So we're Midtown. So I'm 42nd Street, Times Square, Broadway, all that stuff. That's where we were. And the plane hits downtown. So we couldn't see it because also Manhattan kind of is a hill. And it's a slight hill, but it's a hill. So you can't stand at 42nd and look down Broadway and see it. If it were flat, we would have seen it. But so it's a world apart, it seems. But when trying to get home, you can't get home except by passing the World Trade Center. So, it was about 30 blocks or so. We didn't feel it, other than knowing by the news. We would have no clue.
Oh my goodness! So,
wasn't loud or anything.
So could you hear it at all? I know it was 30 blocks away, but so you couldn't hear it. So you would have had no knowledge of it.
So and that's the interesting thing. You couldn't hear it. You couldn't see it. We had no idea except by the news. So when the world found out, we found out.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we would have, it's New York City. You'd never know. But when the world finds out, we found out. And the reason why it impacted us is because I think for the next 10, 15 minutes, there were fire trucks just storming down Broadway. And we're thinking, okay, that's odd, but we understood because a plane hits. And then for the next 6 hours, probably, there were emergency vehicles and fire trucks just traveling down. So we could see that. And we realized, okay, something happened. Then cell phone signals went down. And then you had all the bomb threats. I mean, it was just a crazy day. Yeah. And, ultimately everybody shut their buildings down and their businesses down. They were done because what are you going to do?
Yeah. So did you stay in the store pretty much the entire time, or did you go out, or did you go home?
Well, yeah. So we stayed in the store for a few hours because we were all afraid. So we stayed in the store. It was safe in the store. At one point we left, and I shut the store down, got my employees out, and we tried to go home. And then we realized, number one, nothing was running because all the train stations, they all come out of underneath the World Trade Center.
Yeah. So
when that got hit, and I think at that point, one of the buildings probably fell down. And so they destroyed the whole train station. So the subway system was disrupted. So we realized, all right, we couldn't really do that. We can go roundabout. And then we all went to Grand Central Station, which is kind of, if you think of Manhattan like a T, the World Trade Center is on the bottom of the T, and kind of where we are is where the cross is. And Grand Central Station is on that cross. We started walking there, and it's not funny, but when I think back of it now, it's pretty funny. We started walking there to Grand Central Station. I'm, leading my team, and we're all going to Grand Central Station to try to go home some way. And then all of a sudden you see one person running, and you see 10 people running, and you see like 50 people running. And we're like, okay, we're going back to the store. So we ran back to the store, opened up the store, went in the store and shut it down. And they said there was a bomb threat in Grand Central Station. There never was, but everybody gets nervous, and you see people running, you run. And then we stayed in the store and just hung out for another 8 hours until we could actually walk home.
Oh my goodness.
We walked home, Emma. Yeah, I think that day it took me 6 hours to get home. It would normally take 1 hour.
6 hours?
6 hours.
That's a good workout.
Yeah. So if you wanted it to be a workout, but here's what's cool. Number one, I love walking Manhattan. And so walking downtown was not a problem. But here's what's interesting, and think about this. When world events happen, they start to change your view. So number one, we're walking down Manhattan, but we're walking in the middle of the street. And like, this is New York before they started making it pedestrian friendly. So there's usually cars and cabs and beeping horns and trucks, and it's just chaos. And we're literally walking, hundreds of people walking one direction in the middle of the street, Manhattan.
That's such a weird feeling.
Then we get to the bridge. It's weird. And we get to the bridge crossing, and you start to see the smoke. About maybe 10, 15 blocks before that, you start seeing the dust on the floor. So all the images that you probably see on TV, the dust and the debris, we started seeing that. And then we started walking through it, and that's eerie. And then, there's this scene of smoke. What used to be the Twin Towers, by then they both fell. What used to be the Twin Towers is now a pillar of smoke. And when I think about 9/11, that's the image that's always in my mind. It's that pillar of smoke. That's where the Twin Towers would have stood. So we had to walk past that. We had to walk across the bridge. And again, that visual is just solidified in my brain, walking to Brooklyn, hoping to walk to somewhere where there's a bus running, and ultimately got home.
Wow. Did you have trouble breathing walking by the site?
Nah. Not that number one, not that I remember or know of, and I don't think anything that anyone would remember. That was probably the furthest from my mind. It was cool though. So, you think about tragedy, and the one thing that was really beautiful about the moment was it was a moment that really unified the city. And I think in any tragedy, you want a tragedy to unify a group of people. And 9/11, what was unique about that is that you're looking at 300 people all afraid for their lives trying to get home. We weren't buddies or anything, but we were all on mission, to get home or to survive this thing or figure it all out. And you've got just 300 people just walking one direction, going one place, wanting to get through it. And so the breathing, none of that stuff even mattered to us. It was just, let's get home and let's get home safely. So that's the cool thing of that moment that I don't know that media catches. It was that. That was a great feeling.
Did you ever run into any of those people again, or did you just were with them one time just trying to get home?
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe, but now New Yorkers don't necessarily introduce themselves.
Yeah.
It's not what we do. We just we're trying to get somewhere. We just do it. And that's what people say New Yorkers are rude. And I always say, no, we're not rude. We just focus. We've got things to do. We don't have time for other people. But, in that moment, we're all on the same team.
Right. I get that. So did you have any relatives or friends in the city who you were worried about when the attack happened? I mean, I'm assuming you had some family in New York, maybe?
Yeah. And I guess at that moment, nobody that I knew worked in those buildings. Now, I found out later that there were some people that I did know that worked there, but either they weren't there or they got out, but no one that was close that we knew. Yeah. When I went to Nashville and I pastored in Nashville, one of my congregation members, he told me his wife was assigned to work in those buildings. And for some reason, she either turned down the job or she didn't get it. And he said, and it was like a week before. And he said, if she would have gotten that, she literally would have been in there. And she's seeing impaired. She can't see. And so you just think of, sometimes you look at how God shows favor
Mm-hmm.
in certain seasons, and we can look back and say, well, God protected me from that moment. And we don't have all the explanations for it, but we can definitely thank God that that moment was a moment that his hand was in.
I'm glad. I'm glad you didn't know anyone who was hurt by that. That would have been awful. So, how did 9/11 impact you personally? Did it leave like a mark on you for the rest of your life, or was it just an event you're like, "Oh, it happened," you know?
No, it left a mark. So it's pretty multifaceted. So two things I think it left a mark. Number one, it left a mark of vulnerability, and not vulnerability in the way that you might think. We think we're vulnerable to attack, and that's, sure, we're vulnerable to attack, but the vulnerability that it left was the vulnerability realizing that I can't save everybody, and there was a group of us that were wondering what can we do.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't really run into the buildings. We weren't certified. We couldn't do that. What could we do? And so there's that feeling of, man, we can't help. And there's a vulnerability to that. We realize our humanity. And so if there's any mark, that was the one that left the impact, is God, if ever something happens, I want to be in position to help. And so I think that totally revolutionized my thinking. Second vulnerability, the second thing that I think the impact was how the city bounced back. And couple of ways, because I love media and I love music and entertainment. So one of the things that I thought was significant was sports had to come back. And that sounds weird, but I was looking at some articles, and they were talking about when sports started back, and they were talking about how when the Yankees went back out to play, and then the president threw out the first pitch, and how significant of a moment that was. And then David Letterman is credited with being the first night talk show host to go back on TV. And I remember, and they say his monologue wasn't funny. He had to remember the towers, but he said, we can't just pause. We have to go back and find some sort of normal. And so that was the other impression, is that I realized that any event, any world event, tragic or whatever we see, at some point we have to move on from it. And I like to look at scripture. And I think about Jeremiah 29:11, and people, always quote that. I know the plans that I have for you, but the context is, you guys, Israel, are going to be exiled, and it's going to be uncomfortable. Babylon is going to rule you, and you're just going to be subject to them. But God said it's going to happen for 70 years. After 70 years, I'm going to bring you back. So while you're there, you've got to unwind. You've got to get involved. You've got to live life. You've got to, get married, do the things that you normally do. At some point, you've got to move past the mourning for the moment and move to see what God wants to do. But God says, after 70 years, I'm going to bring you back, guys. So be ready. So I think that's 9/11. It was tragic, and it left a scar, and it left memories, and it affected a lot of people. But at some point, we had to figure out, all right, how do we move past that? And the church had to figure out, what do we do with that moment? And I think that's the challenge for everybody. What do you do with the moment that God has given you?
That's a really encouraging perspective. I like looking at the world that way, just not being stuck on a moment, but realizing it happened and then moving forward.
Yeah. And you know what? I think for the believer, I think for me, it's like, all right, well, God has given me this moment. He could have put a lot of people on the earth at whatever moment. He chose us. So, all right, let's do it, God. Roll up our sleeves, and what do you want? And we move people past it.
All right. So how long did it take for New York to kind of get back to normal? Was it, the next day or next week or next month, or how long do you think it took?
That assumes that New York was ever normal, and number two, it assumes that New York has gotten back to normal. I'll give you this is the visual, another visual imprinted on my mind. I used to go, believe it or not, and buy records. Do you even know what records are?
Yeah, I have some in my room. I have a record player.
You have a record player?
I do, and I have a subwoofer too. My dad helped me. He set up the speakers. It's really great.
There you go. Yeah. Well, those used to be regular. But I remember I used to go shopping to buy my records right downtown, probably 2 blocks from where the World Trade Center was. And when we opened our store back, I remember I remember taking the train downtown Manhattan. And I remember walking past where I used to buy records. And on the other side of the bridge, again, you got to cross these bridges to get to and from the island, was a tank, like a military tank.
Oh my
it's just sitting there on the other side of the bridge. Yeah. And it's got, people in there with guns, like military weapon. And I thought, okay, the world is different now. Today, the world is different. And then I think I took the train home, and in the train station, there were military, men with their military weapons in the train stations. And I realized it's not going back to normal. It's not going back to the normal that it used to be.
Yeah.
Now everything's changed. So it found its own normal, but it wasn't the normal that it used to be.
So how would you apply what you've learned from the events that happened in 9/11 to the coronavirus pandemic and today and quarantine and things happening with that in the new normal that
I think
today?
And we hate that term new normal,
mm-hmm.
but there's always new normal, right? There was a new normal before Jesus Christ came to earth, right?
Yeah.
There was an old normal and there's a new normal once he shows up. It's like, okay, we can't live life the way we used to because, something significant just happened in history, right? And you can look at so many times in history, Pearl Harbor. There was a normal before Pearl Harbor, and after that, there's a new normal. And so we rally against new normals. And so now there's this new normal of, you leave the house, you make sure you have your keys, you make sure you have your cell phone, probably in reverse. You probably make sure you have a cell phone first. Then you make sure you have your keys, your car keys, and you make sure you have your face covering. Mm-hmm. It's like, where did that come from? But that's the new normal.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I mean, who's going to, in 9/11, who's going to walk up to the tank and say, okay, you're not welcome here. I'm going to push you into the water. I'm not. That's just how life is.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, if face coverings are if that's what's now normal, you kind of do it. But you don't get locked or stuck in the moment, because we always have to remember that moment is going to pass. And guess what? There's going to be another moment. And if we're not equipped to deal with this moment, what makes us think we can deal with the next moment?
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, so coronavirus now, as I grew up, there were other things. There were, the AIDS was huge. When AIDS popped on the scene, HIV AIDS, it was like, that was this moment for us growing up. And now no one even talks about it. And so now you've got this coronavirus. I promise you, after this is going to be something else. And you know what? It's you deal with the moments, you love people through it, and you roll up your sleeves and say, all right, God, what do I do here?
Yeah, especially as a Christian, just looking at things from an eternal perspective. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. And you really can't if you look at things in any other way than eternal, man, you'll lose your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because all these things you can't change. It's like, I can't lift up a big net and stop corona. It's like, that's not going to, I can't spray a spray and get rid of it like I spray mosquitoes. It's like, can't do that. So you've got to look eternally, that's why people get depressed and discouraged. I mean, 9/11, people lost loved ones, and they lost loved ones, and those loved ones did nothing wrong except for go to work. And you realize there's nothing I could have done to change that moment. So how do I love those people through the moment?
Right.
That's what I learned through 9/11. How do you love them through the moment? How do you love them through the moment of corona? How do you love them through the moment of civil disruption? Mm-hmm. How do you love people through this moment?
I love that. I think loving someone through the moment is really standing by their side and just helping them no matter what, So have you ever been to the 9/11 memorial in New York City?
I have not. I so desperately want to go, and I have not. Why? Do you have tickets?
No, I don't.
Are you sending me tickets?
I'm not. Maybe if we get our hands on ones, we'll have to let you know. But I went a few years ago, and I believe it's the memorial outside, like they're like reflecting pools, I believe. I think I went there, and I was getting really sad. It was a lot to take in for sure. I recommend any of our listeners, if you're in New York City, definitely go by there, because I wasn't even alive when this event happened, which is crazy to think about. But when I got there, I was just imagining the planes coming through, and I was like, oh my goodness, I can't imagine a survivor going back there. It'd have to be really hard.
And from what I understand, they have all the names of the people who died, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That would be the hard one, because, they were actually names. So I'll throw this out here. You saw that, and I really want to see that, because I think it would impact me, because I used to hang out on the top of the World Trade Centers every all the time. I used to always go to the top. I mean, that was my thinking place. But another visual during 9/11 was just going to work every day and seeing people they would put flyers up with a picture of their loved one saying, have you seen my, husband? Have you seen my child? Have you seen this one? And that's the one that it's like, well,
yeah,
that's tough.
It is really tough. It's hard to imagine, because at least they're trying to find their loved ones.
Yeah. Wow. And in the back of your mind, knowing that loved one probably died, it's kind of that last bit of hope. So
how long were those flyers up there? Like a month or so, or?
No, I think I moved out of New York City. I think I came down to Nashville again in about 2002,
mm-hmm.
and they were there. They were there still.
Oh my goodness!
Some of them.
Oh.
Yep.
Well.
No one would dare remove them.
I bet that would be very rude, for sure.
Yep.
Now, what is one question that you wish that I'd asked you that I haven't asked you?
Ooh, well, that's a good question. That's hard.
It is a hard question. Hard questions are the good questions.
They can be. I think the question that I would want to answer is, what was the role of the church through that?
Well, what was the role of the church?
I think. Yeah, so that I think was pretty cool. Another article that I looked at, and this was, and you can look this up. This might be a really cool one for your history of, but St. Paul's Chapel.
Mm-hmm.
And St. Paul's Chapel, I don't know if you've heard of it. Matter of fact, you probably saw it if you went to the memorial, because St. Paul's Chapel was, it literally stood in the shadow of the World Trade Center. And historically speaking, the Twin Towers fell, and that building, it's a small little church building, just old church. In fact, I've been to it once, because I had a pastor who spoke there once, and it was unscathed.
Wow.
Untouched. Everything else around it destroyed. That church remained, and I thought that was amazing. But it just kind of showed a little bit of God's hand there, mm-hmm. preserving who He is. And then you see church. So a lot of churches came out there and they preached there. It's the church at that moment was the church universally, not just New York churches. Big churches, small churches, churches from out of New York came to help people, just to be there, to give water, to give counseling. I loved seeing the response of Christians in that moment to really make a difference in people's lives. I loved that. And that would be my prayer for any other situation in our time, is that if no one else knows what to do, that the body of Christ would know this is our moment. And I think 9/11 was a great example of that moment.
I'm glad that happened, and I really would love for the church just in general to unite more like that. How long do you think that the church acted like that, and then when do you think they started dwindling?
Let's see. David Letterman was about a week after the event, and the church was probably aggressively significant for probably a good month, mm-hmm. and then things kind of fell back into normal, and then that aggressive effort, can't say it died down. I'm trying to watch my word. It didn't die down, but it was no longer publicized.
Right.
And now when I look at even this moment, I'm always careful about what's publicized, because what's publicized isn't always what's happening.
Yes.
And so there's so many good things that are happening that don't get publicized. And I don't know, the church was still significant. It just wasn't publicized. And then everybody kind of went back to their neutral corners and did their thing, and I don't know. You can't really tell when it dies down. You can tell when it's not as popular, I guess.
Yeah. Well, is there one thing that you would want our listeners to take away from this conversation? If there was one thing you'd want them to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
If there's one thing that I want people to take away is this is your moment. This is it. Whatever your moment is, whatever your this is your moment. Use it well. Be a good steward of the moments that you're given, because that's what you're going to be held accountable for.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for this interview, Mr. Carter. It was a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for even allowing me. This is pretty fun.
This is fun. I like this a lot. I hope we can do more interviews in the future. I really do like these.
You should. So now here's my trade-off, though.
Oh,
you ready?
All right.
There will be compensation. Are you ready?
Compensation.
This is how you're going to pay me. You ready?
Okay.
Is Robert ready?
Yeah, he has his headphones on. He's listening.
Okay. So my wife does a talk show, and so you got to let her interview you.
Me? And Robert too, right? Oh, that'd be so fun. I would love that.
You gotta let her interview you.
What kind of talk show does she do?
I think you have a story to tell, and I think people need to see you, and I think people need to hear your story, because you're on the cusp of changing your environment, your society.
Well, I think we would be honored. That would be amazing. Yeah, just let me know when she wants to.
You got it.
Well, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. See you guys.
See ya.
All right. That was the interview. That was on Zoom, if you couldn't tell. Please let us know if you would like to see any interviews like that. Again, we're definitely thinking about doing those again. Let us know if you have any interviews you would like to see with any specific people. We would love to have that. And I would like to credit the idea for this episode to Christian Miller. He gave me this idea. And if you have any questions or comments about the information provided in this episode, or if you have any ideas for future episodes or for future interviews, please contact us at thehistoryof365@gmail.com. Have a blessed day, and you've got to promise me something. Never stop learning.